Well, things are getting really interesting in Cincinnati with 7 games to go and perhaps the return of Joe Burrow. Like it might be happening in 2 days. Let's get started. Well, if you're watching this on video, how about this? A cup of coffee in my hand. Now, this is a cold brew from Starbucks, not the typical cup of Joe that if you're a longtime viewer of the podcast, you've seen dating back almost a year now since I've restarted it. But I am recording this on Friday morning. Got some coffee. I'm going to take a drink now as we get started on this bonus episode this week of Ball Don't Lie. So, I wanted to make a second episode to kind of think about more and talk about Zach Taylor and his reaction to what happened on Sunday. I'm going to get to that. But first, I want to talk about the developments of this week, which mean Joe Burrow, or could mean Joe Burrow plays on Sunday against the New England Patriots. Now, full disclosure, I'm recording this. It's 9:21 a.m. on Friday. The Bengals practice in a couple of hours. Reports indicate that the Bengals will make a decision today on who their starting quarterback is going to be. So, if you remember, last week, earlier this week, actually, was it? I don't know. All the days are running together. Joe Burrow had his 21-day window opened, which means he can practice with the team. He practiced a little bit last week, I remember now. He was limited. He did not go to Pittsburgh as a part of that trip. Well, this week, he was a full participant in practice, which means he took 100% of the reps for his position on the depth chart. So Wednesday, Joe Flacco did not practice. That's kind of been the plan for him, dealing with that shoulder injury on his right shoulder. Flacco doesn't really practice. He doesn't throw. He's officially listed as limited on the Bengals injury report. Well, Wednesday, Joe Burrow does practice. He's listed as full. And when that's the case, he took all the first team reps. Joe Burrow took all the first team reps, not Jake Browning. That's notable. So you go to Thursday and you're thinking, okay, well, now that Flacco is going to throw again during practice, maybe we'll see Burrow as limited. Wrong. Joe Flacco listed as limited again. Burrow listed as a full participant, which means he's taking more reps than the other two quarterbacks. Now, we don't know about Jake Browning because obviously he's not injured, so he's not on the injury report. But if he was taking reps away from either of those two guys, you would see Burrow listed as limited. So all this leads to the idea that maybe, just maybe, with the Bengals really only hope being winning the last 7 games, and if you remember in 23 and if you remember in 24, they rattled off 5-game win streaks to finish, or they rattled off a 5-game win streak to finish off the season in 24. They went on a good stretch run at the end of 23 to just narrowly miss the playoffs. So we've kind of seen this movie before. Backs up against the wall. Can Joe Burrow be a Superman? Can he be a superhero? Can he actually get the Bengals to the playoffs? And it's nuts that this dude is 65 days post-op and is practicing in a full capacity, is running around in full pads, is doing 11-on-11 drills. That was the next step this week. He did that for the first time and was full in all those. And it seems like there's this idea that Burrow is going to play. T. Higgins, wide receiver, was asked yesterday if Burrow is going to play. And Higgins said, I don't know. But when I asked him, he gave me this look. And this look was like, so nobody seems to know. Now, it's expected, as I said, that on Friday the Bengals are going to make the decision. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't know if we'll know for sure. They might make the decision today. We may not know until Saturday. The Bengals have a lot of roster moves that have to happen. Mike Gesicki is going to be activated. Dejon Anthony is going to be activated. Joe Burrow might be activated. There's some practice squad stuff that has to move around. So we don't know exactly what the roster looks like. They're probably going to put Cam Taylor-Britt on the IR due to his injury and him needing surgery. More than likely his season and maybe career in Cincinnati is now over. But those are conversations for another day. The ridiculousness of the idea that Joe Burrow can play or should play. And I've seen a lot of people on social media saying that the Bengals are rushing Joe Burrow back and they shouldn't be doing that. And my question for you would be, if a player is medically cleared to play and feels comfortable doing so, is that the organization rushing him back? That would be my question. Whether it's this week against New England or next week on Thanksgiving night against Baltimore. If a player is medically cleared and feels comfortable doing so, is that rushing him back? I don't know that I would say it is. And Joe, we have seen in the past with his other injuries, is known to be a fast healer. He's known to attack rehab. He's multiple times now come back a little bit sooner than expected. Now, nobody expected him to come back this quickly. I don't think anybody was expecting that from the Bengals quarterback. But the idea that he could play Sunday, it's really in play. And everybody that I talk to around the team, that covers the team, involved in any way, shape, and form, nobody really seems to know for sure, but they all get the vibe like, I think it's going to happen. I think Joe Burrow is going to play against the New England Patriots. I think there's two ways to look at this. Number one, Joe this week was the next phase of his progression. Last week he did 7-on-7. This week he did 11-on-11. And next week they have a short week game against Baltimore. So their practices and their practice schedule is going to be truncated next week. They're not going to practice it the same way. They're not going to have maybe those 11-on-11s, maybe those team periods, all that stuff that you would typically do because of the condensed week, because of the holiday, because of all that stuff. The practice schedule is a little bit different. So I think the first possibility is this. Joe Burrow feels good. He feels great. Joe Flacco is too injured, and Joe Burrow is going to start against the New England Patriots sooner than expected. That's option number one. Option number two is that because of the truncated schedule next week with a short week in Baltimore, this is the best ramp-up period that Burrow is going to have to be able to play. That means he's just getting and using this week to get ready for Baltimore, and that he won't play this week against the New England Patriots. I think that's a real possibility. I think both of them are real possibilities. Honest to God, I don't know which one is more likely, but I think you can make the case, and the case would make sense for either one of those. But there was one part of this whole thing that made me think a little bit differently about it. And it was an interview that Zach Taylor did on 700 WLW with Tom Brenneman. Now, I've played Zach Taylor clips on this podcast before. If you're a Bengals fan, you've heard Zach Taylor talk. He's first team all coach speak. He's usually a little monotone. When they're losing, he's never in a good mood. He never reveals very much. But in this conversation with Tom Brenneman, and credit to Tom, who I think did a really good job with this interview, you kind of felt the smile on Zach Taylor's face. You felt the bubble. You felt the personality. You're like, wait a minute. This dude's in a great mood for being 3-7 here. Take a listen. This is about 2 minutes. I edited this down to keep it as succinct as what's the word I'm looking for? Slim down as possible. Here's Tom Brenneman talking to Zach Taylor about whether or not Joe Burrow is going to play this week.
Is Joe Burrow going to play on Sunday?
Well, we don't know that yet. You know, it's kind of a balance of Joe Flacco hasn't been practicing on Wednesdays, so it was a great opportunity to get Joe Burrow out there to take as many reps as possible. So, yeah, he took all the reps, but that was a balance with Joe has not been practicing on Wednesdays the last few weeks, and so we'll just keep working through these next couple of days.
Is there a chance that he plays Sunday?
Well, I'm not there yet. You know, it's one day of practice isn't going to lead to that decision yet, so we'll use the time we have at our disposal and come with the best decision we can.
Are you even amazed that he's even on the practice field at this point in time?
Am I amazed? No, because I've watched this guy for the last 6 years, and I've seen him. He's obviously wired different than everybody else. That's why he's a national champion, Heisman Trophy winning, first pick in the draft, all that kind of stuff. NFL comeback player, all the stuff that he's earned. And so I've just now seen enough to where I just know that's who he is. And this isn't the first rehab he's had to go through, so he knew what that process was. Obviously, different injuries. Proud of him, not surprised. Maybe surprised the rest of the world, but it's really impressive the work that he's done to get back on the field as quickly as he did.
Will this be a situation where Joe might come into you, Joe Burrow? He might come to you and say, hey, Coach, I feel like I'm ready to go.
Oh yeah. That's yeah. And then that's my job, to balance all the information and protect the player and make the best decision possible. But yeah, absolutely. He's certainly got his opinions when he's put in the work and feels how he does, and we'll balance all that information.
Come on, Coach. You can tell us right now. Burrow's playing, isn't he? He's playing, isn't he?
Yeah, no, I wish I could. I wish I had that decision today. Honestly, I'm going to take in all the information I can make sure it's the best one for Joe and our team, and we'll go from there.
Sounds to me like Joe Burrow is pounding the table to be able to play this week against the New England Patriots. Honest to God, I hope it happens. He's a great player. He's healthy. He's the best player on the team. Let's hope the guy plays. I have no problem with it. And honest to God, you can't live a life out of fear. You cannot live your life out of fear of getting hurt or any of it. The season's lost. He at least is something that provides hope. Technically, they're not mathematically eliminated. I would expect him to play every game up until maybe the final game of the year against the Cleveland Browns. Myles Garrett's probably going to be going for like a record-setting sack and probably going to try to kill Joe Burrow that day. So we could probably keep Joe out of the lineup then. But you can't operate out of fear in the National Football League. Hope Joe plays this week against New England. Hope that somehow makes the defense better. Don't know that it will, but hope that it does, and the Bengals can go on some sort of run to make this relevant in the second part of this season here. And obviously, Thanksgiving night got a whole lot better if Joe Burrow is going to be going up against Lamar Jackson next Thursday night. All right, let's go to topic number 2 and go back to Zach Taylor and rewind a little bit to what happened on the Monday following the Steelers' loss. There were 2 exchanges that Zach Taylor had with the media covering the Bengals that I thought were noteworthy and have just kind of been replaying in my head over and over and over again. So if you remember, Jamar Chase got suspended by the NFL for 1 game. That suspension was upheld for spitting on Jalen Ramsey. And I think that is deserved, and I think Jamar made a mistake, and it sucks that the Bengals are going to be without him this Sunday against New England. And one of the things that I find interesting is the way that Zach Taylor handled the situation. And most notably, the idea that Zach is the only person in the Bengals organization that we typically get to hear from about stuff like this and really about anything. And so here's a back and forth between a beat reporter for the Bengals by the name of Mike Petraglia and Bengals head coach Zach Taylor. Take a listen.
Are you concerned about the image of the organization being really under a lot of criticism nationally? And I'm just curious what the conversations are like internally that you have all the time with Mike and Katie and Troy on matters like that.
Well, first of all, I've always been impressed with how Jamar's handled himself because he is in a lot of these situations where he's got a target as a top player. He gets a lot of respect that way. And so guys try to do a lot of things to get his attention and get him off his game. And I've always thought it was unbelievable how he's handled himself in some really high-pressure emotional decisions. Obviously, what happened is crossing the line. We can't have that, and I know he'll own up to that. But beyond that, I've always sat up here and praised Jamar because he's one of the best leaders we've got. The way he goes about everything, he plays with a ton of emotion. He plays with a ton of leadership. Our guys respond to that. And I've always appreciated how he's handled himself.
I guess the reason I ask you is because you're really the only one we have to talk to in the organization that can reflect how the organization feels after a really unfortunate, ugly moment like yesterday.
Yeah.
And how do you feel? How do they feel?
Well, again, Jamar is one of my favorite. I love how this guy handles everything that he's been a part of. So making one mistake doesn't disregard everything this guy's done that's been positive for us. And so I think that's what you're asking. I really don't know what you're asking me. But, again, I can't say enough positive things about Jamar and think about the amount of situations people have tried to put him in and the way that he's always responded. And we're not all perfect. We're going to make a mistake here and there. But I stand by Jamar, and I know it's an emotional situation. I know there's a lot of things going on there that lead to things like that. And again, we'll just continue to move forward.
I give Trag some credit for asking that question. Not an easy question to ask, and a question that you're probably not going to get an answer to. Number one, Zach's not going to speak for Duke Tobin. He's not going to speak for Mike Brown or Katie Blackburn or Troy. He's not going to speak for any of those people. But I do think he answered the question without answering it. Number one, he knows the question. He chose not to directly address the question. Number two, his answer is probably what the internal reflection of the organization is, probably a reflection of what the internal reaction is to what happened to Jamar Chase. This sucks. I hate that he did it. We wish he wouldn't have, but we're not going to crucify a guy over one mistake. He's done so many good things that we're not going to just throw everything away over one thing. I think Zach's answer is a reflection of how the organization feels from the top down. And so I think that was his way of answering that question to Mike Petraglia. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that the question was asked because I do think we should hear more from the organization. Anybody in media or a Bengals fan would tell you the same thing. And it brought to light, we had this conversation on ESPN 1530 this week. Listening to Zach Taylor enough and being around him and knowing him, all this stuff about Zach over the last 6-7 years, his character. You know the type of person and the type of man and the type of leader he is. And the answer to the Ja'Marr Chase thing, I think, is a reflection of that. And one of the reasons why over the years I have pounded the table for Zach Taylor and I believe in him is because of his character and because of the way he leads people and the way that just something about him works. Now, I'm not saying Zach is the guy to get them to the Super Bowl. And I have multiple times on this podcast said I would be okay if the Bengals move on from him. I get that. I would have no problem with that. However, I feel very comfortable in knowing the character and the man that Zach Taylor is, and comfortable that even if he continues on as the head coach, I would feel like a good person. It's in the hands of a good person who sees things clearly and can work well with other people, and especially lead young players in the NFL. I would understand that. You know what I don't feel that about? You know who I don't feel that way about? Duke Tobin. Duke Tobin, I don't know anything about him. I don't know anything about his character. I've heard from people around the organization that maybe he's not the nicest guy, maybe not somebody that you want to go grab a beer with. But because he doesn't own up to his mistakes, he doesn't talk to the media, it makes me question his character. Because if I was in a situation in which I was making mistakes and I was failing at my job and someone else had to answer for it, that would make me uncomfortable. I wouldn't stand for that. I would come out and say, hey, no, that's not his fault. That's not her fault. That's my fault. This is something that I did wrong. This is me not doing a good enough job to help him. And this was the issue. And it's on me more than it's on someone else. And that's the case here. With Duke Tobin, many of these failed draft picks, many of the issues that the Bengals have had with developing young players falls squarely on Duke Tobin's shoulders. But because he doesn't come out and take the accountability and put his hand up and answer the questions that the fans want answers to, that the media want answers to, and that the National Football League want answers to, and I'm sure some of the players in the locker room want answers to, it makes me question his character. It makes me wonder, is this really a stand-up guy? Is this a guy whose moral compass is heading in the right direction? Is this the type of leader that you want towards the top of the food chain with your football team? Is this the guy you want as your director of player personnel in leading scouting? Is that really what you want? And Duke Tobin could come out and take accountability and answer these questions, and he could easily change my opinion. But I don't know anything about him, so based off of these interactions in which Zach is almost always the only person in the organization to speak up when it comes to football operations, and he's the one who's taking the arrows every single day and every single week, I can't help but question what really is the character of Duke Tobin. Because that, to me, seems like a bad teammate. And if you preach accountability, if you preach taking in understanding your actions and how they affect other people, how they impact other people, well, then there's misalignment from Duke Tobin down. Zach Taylor can say these things. Ja'Marr Chase can say these things. Joe Burrow and say these things. And Trey Hendrickson can say these things. But the guy who's putting the team together can't. That just doesn't sit well with me. And I wish that the Bengals would be more open-minded to changing that and being more transparent with those conversations. It may not work. It may not give us the answers that we want. But across the league, you see more players of personnel talk, GMs talk consistently, and give an insight and an understanding to the process and the plan and what the organization is trying to do to build a winner. If something was inherently untrue about me, if something was totally false, and the media was out there running with it, I would do everything in my power to pound the table and say, this is not true. Here's the reality of the situation. And the Bengals, it doesn't seem like, do that. They allow narratives to spread instead of nipping them in the bud and proving this is what we're doing, and this is our thought process, or this is how we're doing it. Instead, they let those stories fester. They let the narrative grow. There's a narrative out there that the Bengals are cheap. Now, I don't know that that's necessarily true. I think it's more of incompetence at the Duke Tobin level more than they are cheap. But they've allowed that narrative to spread over the years. And so now, when things go wrong, all of a sudden, all anybody wants to do is blame the owner and say that the owner's cheap and it's the owner's issue. And I'm sure everybody in there is responsible for something that's wrong within the organization and part of this failure. But at the same time, when you allow a narrative to fester, like the Duke Tobin situation, when you just allow it to continue to grow, it's like a wildfire, isn't it? Like if you allow one flame to go and you burn down one tree, next thing you know, the whole forest is on fire. How do you fix that? I wish that they would do better at that. And I think they know. I think maybe there's some internal conversation about that. I don't know. I don't really know all that much, but I've said this many times. I think those people are too smart. I don't think they are as dumb as people say they are. I know they're smarter than this. How they choose to handle it, I question. And I think that's fair. And they may disagree with that. That's fine. I think it's fair. I think a lot of fans would say that that's fair. But I want to finish with this, and it kind of does hammer home the thought process of Zach Taylor and why I like him and why I believe in him and why I appreciate that as a head coach. Obviously, he's mandated by the league to do this. I appreciate his answers, his candidness, his honesty, his transparency in the midst of a losing season. Take a listen to this exchange at the end of Zach's press conference from Monday.
Zach, do you get a sense of the frustration around the city from fans kind of as the season kind of goes the way it does in the last couple of years, how they've went? Do you get a sense of kind of the frustration that kind of can simmer?
I'm not oblivious. I have to isolate myself. I have to. That's the only way I can function. And I think that's understandable. But you also, again, it's no one puts more pressure on us than I do on myself to get it right. And so I'm not oblivious to frustration, and I know what our record is, and so that would lead to that. And I don't blame anybody for feeling that way. It's our job as a NFL team to go find wins and create energy and joy in this fan base, in our organization, in our locker room, coaching staff. Winning helps everybody do their job the next day, the next week, and I want nothing more than that. And I know if we can string together some wins, start to build some optimism. But first, we've got to show a step in the right direction of doing that. So until we do that, I understand how difficult it is.
Good stuff from the Bengals head coach, Zach Taylor. Now, as I said, we'll learn more about the Joe Burrow situation either later today, Friday, or Saturday prior to the game when I expect a plethora of roster moves coming down from the Bengals. And obviously we'll hear about the game on Sunday, and I'll be right back here on Wednesday prior to Thanksgiving, and looking forward to that. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. Whatever news happens with Joe Burrow and the Bengals over the weekend, when it happens, run to my social media at Auty Elmore, AutyElmore. I'll post my reaction to what's going on and my immediate thoughts in whatever is determined about the future of the Bengals quarterback. Thanks again so much for listening. See you again next week. This has been episode number 163 of the Ball Don't Lie podcast. And as always, have fun, be safe, go Bucks.